All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about aviation safety.
Always a hot topic.
Yeah, especially with all this stuff we've been seeing in the news lately.
Right. Seems like every time you turn it on, there's another incident.
Yeah, exactly. So we found this article in Newsweek called "How Many Plane Crashes Have There Been in the U.S. in 2025 versus 2024?" Pretty straightforward.
Makes you think, though, doesn't it?
It really does, especially with all these mid-air collisions we've been hearing about and emergency landings. I mean, it's kind of unsettling.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I can definitely see why people are feeling on edge.
Oh, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And then you throw in all that recent scrutiny surrounding the Trump administrations, the whole thing with the FAA employee layoffs.
Yeah.
And it really makes you wonder if there's some connection.
Yeah, could be a factor.
So we're going to try to get to the bottom of it today.
Sounds good.
Are these, anxieties that people have, are they justified?
Right.
Are we actually statistically seeing more crashes, or is it just, more media coverage?
Let's find it.
All right, so this Newsweek article, it starts off by talking about a recent incident, a mid-air collision between two small planes in Arizona.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that one.
Yeah, at least one confirmed fatality so far. Pretty tragic.
Very tragic.
But it's a stark reminder of those inherent risks that come with flying.
Definitely. And it's important to note that the FAA and the National Transportation Safety Board, they're both still investigating it.
Oh, right.
So it's too early to say anything definitive about the cause.
Absolutely takes time, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. Uh, the article cites NTSB data saying that as of February 19th, 2025, there have been 87 aviation accidents in the U.S.
87.
Yeah, and that's not even including that Arizona collision we just talked about.
Okay.
And get this, that's actually fewer than the 123 accidents that were reported during the same time period in 2024.
Huh. So fewer accidents overall.
Yeah, so far at least.
That is interesting.
It is, but there is kind of a twist.
What's the...
Well, even though the overall number of crashes is down in 2025, the number of fatalities has more than doubled.
More than doubled.
Yeah, it's crazy. Right, so fewer crashes, but they're more severe.
That is a twist.
Yeah.
I wonder why that is.
Well, it looks like the types of aircraft involved could be a key factor.
Okay.
So the article mentions the two largest crashes this year. Those were the American Airlines regional jet collision. Remember that one near Reagan National Airport?
Oh, yeah, that was awful.
It was. And then the Bering Air Cessna Caravan crash in Alaska.
I remember hearing about that one, too.
Yeah, so those two incidents alone, they involved a much higher number of passengers than, like your typical smaller plane crash.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and these larger scale tragedies, even though they're statistically rare,
Yeah.
they have a huge psychological impact.
Right. I mean, a small plane crash, while tragic, it might not even make national news, but a major airline.
Oh, yeah, that's a different story.
It becomes a huge thing. And those images, they stick with people.
They do, unfortunately.
Sadly, it really shapes public perception, even if statistically the overall risk is still pretty low.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of those major incidents, the American Airlines crash, that was 67 lives lost, and the Bering Air crash, 10 lives.
It's just heartbreaking.
It is, and like we were saying, even though those large-scale events are statistically infrequent, they have a huge impact on how we think about flying.
They really do. They fuel our anxieties, even though experts constantly remind us that flying is incredibly safe.
Okay, so let's look back at the 2024 data for a minute. The article mentions that between January 1st and February 19th of 2024, there were 123 aviation accidents.
123.
Yeah, and that resulted in 18 fatalities.
Okay.
Then for the entire year of 2024, there were 1,415 accidents total.
Wow.
Yeah, big number.
Yeah.
257 of those were fatal, resulting in 306 deaths.
Okay, so if we compare that to 2025, what we're seeing is a lower number of crashes overall, but the ones that are happening are much deadlier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it could be related to the types of aircraft involved.
Mm-hmm.
Are larger planes just inherently more susceptible to those catastrophic incidents, or are there other factors at play?
It's a good question. I wonder what the answer is. Yeah, it's a tough one to figure out, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we have all this data saying that statistically flying is still incredibly safe.
Right.
But then you have all these images, these awful plane crashes, these stories that just stay with you.
It's true. It's like we know rationally that sharks are statistically way less dangerous than like vending machines. But try telling that to my heart rate when I'm in the ocean.
Exactly. It's those
Yeah.
really vivid, emotionally charged events. They kind of override the rational part of our brain.
Right. And plane crashes are almost always super publicized.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Tons of discussion, dramatic footage, the whole 9 yards.
I mean, when was the last time you saw a news report about a totally normal flight where nothing went wrong?
Never.
Never happens. It's just not newsworthy.
Right? But a plane skids off the runway or there's a bird strike and they have to make an emergency landing.
Oh, that's front page news.
Yeah, exactly. And then it just spreads like wildfire online, and it just feeds into all of our anxieties.
It's like this vicious cycle. The more we see it, the more we think it's dangerous, even if the data says otherwise.
It's true, and we have to remember the bigger picture here, too. We're just bombarded with information constantly, and a lot of it is negative and anxiety-inducing.
Oh, yeah, the 24/7 news cycle thrives on that kind of stuff.
Exactly, and then you've got social media algorithms that are designed to show you things that will trigger an emotional response.
So basically, our brains are just primed to focus on the negative, even if statistically it's not really that significant.
Yeah, basically. So like with plane crashes, our brains haven't quite caught up to the fact that we're more likely to get injured by a toaster oven than a Boeing 747.
You got that right.
So, okay, we know why we feel anxious about it, but how do we actually deal with that? How do we bridge that gap between the statistical reality and our gut feeling?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right.
There's no easy answer, but I think awareness is a good first step. Understanding how our brains work and how we perceive risk.
So basically being more aware of how the media and social media can kind of make our fears worse.
Right. It's not about ignoring those stories altogether, but just reading them with a critical eye, knowing that they don't always show the whole picture.
Because the media's job is to report what's interesting, not necessarily what's statistically important.
Exactly. And with aviation, the vast majority of flights are completely safe and uneventful.
But those stories don't sell newspapers.
Nope.
If it bleeds, it leads, right?
Sadly, yeah.
Okay, so awareness is important, but is there anything more proactive we can do?
I think it can really help to look for information that challenges our fears. Stuff that reminds us of the statistical realities.
So maybe doing some of our own research on aviation safety statistics.
Exactly. Reading articles from reliable sources that put things in perspective.
Knowledge is power, right?
You got it. And when it comes to anxiety, knowledge can be really empowering.
What about talking to people who actually work in the industry, like pilots or aviation experts?
That's a great idea. Hearing it straight from the people who fly planes every day can be incredibly reassuring.
Because if they're not worried, maybe we shouldn't be either.
Right, and their confidence comes from years of experience and a really deep understanding of how things work.
Okay, so we've talked about the media, the way our brains work, and finding good information. Are there other things we can do to manage anxiety specifically when we're flying?
Well, remember, anxiety is a normal human emotion. It's okay to feel anxious about flying. It's a natural response.
So it's not about getting rid of anxiety altogether.
No.
It's about learning to manage it so it doesn't take over.
Exactly. And there are a lot of different strategies you can use.
Like deep breathing exercises, meditation, listening to calming music.
All great techniques. And then there are things you can do specifically for flying, like being prepared and organized can make a big difference.
So knowing what to expect at the airport, having your documents ready, packing light.
All those little things can reduce stress and make for a much smoother trip.
That's good advice for any kind of travel, really.
Absolutely. And for flying, some people find it helps to choose a certain seat. Like
Right.
sitting near the wing or over the wing can reduce the feeling of turbulence.
Oh, that's a good tip. I always go for the window seat so I can look out and distract myself.
Distraction. There you go. That's another great strategy. Reading a book, watching a movie, listening to music, anything to take your mind off your worries.
And of course, if you're really struggling with anxiety, it's totally okay to talk to a therapist or a counselor.
Absolutely. They can teach you coping mechanisms and help you come up with a plan for managing your fears.
You know, it's funny, we've been talking about anxiety and fear this whole time, but I actually feel better about flying now.
That's great.
It's empowering to understand why we feel the way we do and to know that we can actually do something about it.
I agree. Knowledge really is power, and it's the key to taking control of your anxiety.
Okay, so to wrap up this part of our conversation, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to think about?
I think the most important thing is to remember that even though recent plane crashes might make us feel less safe, flying is still statistically the safest way to travel. Our fears are often amplified by media coverage and our own biology, but there are concrete things we can do to manage those fears and make flying a more comfortable experience.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance between acknowledging our anxieties and empowering ourselves with knowledge and practical strategies. Okay, so we've talked about the statistics and, the psychology behind all of it and some strategies for managing that anxiety. But there's one more thing I kind of wanted to touch on.
Okay.
This whole thing with the Trump administration and those FAA employee layoffs.
Oh, right.
I remember just a few weeks after that awful American Airlines crash near Reagan National, and some people were saying there might be a connection, between the layoffs and this feeling that aviation safety is declining.
It's definitely a complicated issue. We have to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Oh, yeah.
The investigations are still going on, and we don't have all the facts yet.
Right.
But it's definitely a valid concern, and it raises some important questions about staffing levels and how much oversight the government really has.
Yeah, because even if those layoffs didn't directly cause any of these specific incidents, could they be having kind of a ripple effect on the whole system?
Potentially.
Like maybe it's putting more stress on the remaining employees?
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
When you have a system as complex as aviation, even small changes can have consequences that you don't expect.
It's all connected.
Exactly. There's a delicate balance.
So even if it's too early to say for sure, it's something they should keep an eye on.
Absolutely. The safety of air travel is so important. Anything that could be putting that at risk needs to be looked at carefully.
So I guess it all comes back to our original question. Are these feelings that people have about flying, are they justified?
It's a tough one to answer because the data says that flying is still extremely safe. Statistically, there's no reason to panic.
But at the same time, those statistics don't change the fact that these tragedies happened, and they don't address those bigger systemic issues that could be making things less safe.
So it's not a simple yes or no.
No, it's not. It's complicated. We have to look at it from all sides. We can say that statistically flying is safe, but also recognize that people have valid concerns about things like staffing shortages and government oversight.
It seems like the big takeaway from all of this is that it's important to look at things from different angles and not jump to conclusions based on fear or incomplete information.
Couldn't agree more. It's about being informed and thinking critically and staying engaged in the conversation about aviation safety.
Well, I think this has been a really insightful discussion. We've covered a lot of ground today, the statistics, the psychology, the systemic issues. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I would just encourage everyone to keep learning about this topic, do your own research, ask questions, and be part of the conversation about how we can all work together to make flying safer.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
And remember, everyone, knowledge is power. The more we understand about how things work, the less we'll be controlled by fear. So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep exploring. And until next time, safe travels, everyone.
Safe travels.